Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
In early 2019, James Harden gave us the Unguardable tour. 5 years later, entering February 2024, is Jalen Green giving us the Untradeable tour? That's honestly what it's starting to feel like, and especially now that we're inching closer to next week's NBA trade deadline. So as far as how we got here and what the implications are, well, that's what we're going to be unpacking today here at The Logger Line, your source for podcast commentary on all things Houston Rockets basketball. As always, it's served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager and Carbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with the Rockets. As for me, I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. For more information on our friends, partners, and sponsors, as well as distributors to the podcast such as Apple, Google, and Spotify, please check out the link tree in the bio of our Twitter/X page at The Logger Line. That's got all the links you need to consume all sorts of great content, both in terms of this weekly podcast and beyond. As for today's show, I'm again joined by Paulo Alves, my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal. You can follow Paulo on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA. Me, I'm at Ben Dubose. So, since we last had an episode a week ago, the Rockets are 2-2. They won big in Charlotte and at home against the Lakers, which could be big for the play-in race. And they lost a heartbreaker by 2 points in Brooklyn before losing at home to the Pelicans by about 10. They're now 22-25, entering Friday's home game against Toronto, which, let's be honest, that's as close to a must-win game as it gets for the play-in race. The Rockets are still hovering within a game or so of getting into the top 10 of the West standings, which would get them to their goal of a play-in berth. But to actually get over the line, they probably need to get back in the vicinity of 500 or a little bit above. And now that they're 3 under, well, a home game against a bad Toronto team that's lost 9 of their last 11 is one you probably cannot afford to let slip away, especially after losing one to Portland last week. The Rockets do have a 4-game road trip coming up. We know they've been bad on the road all year, just 5-16. That starts Sunday in Minnesota, the top-ranked team by record in the entire Western Conference. So for that and so many reasons, they really need to bank a win on Friday, secure a winning homestand at 2-1, and then we can see where things go from there. But in all honesty, the story is Jalen Green, and yet Jalen is not going to be the lead of this podcast. Because literally in the last 15 minutes prior to our recording time, news leaked, well, on a couple of fronts. First off, Alperen Sengun did not make the All-Star team. Unfortunately, a lot of us suspected that, just so much competition in the West. But even more noteworthy from a team perspective, the Rockets have made a trade. Houston sending 3 second-round picks, 2 in 2024, 1 in 2025, still waiting for clarity as of our podcast recording time, which picks those will be. But the bottom line, sending 3 second-round picks and the expiring salary of Victor Oladipo to the Memphis Grizzlies for Steven Adams. Steven Adams, 30-year-old big man who still should have a lot of game left. He's exactly the type of physical, defensive-minded big man that the Rockets have been seeking really ever since missing out on Brook Lopez. I know he doesn't have the three-point shooting that Brook did, but this is the kind of defensive-minded complement to Alperen Sengun that they've been looking for ever since. They had hoped to potentially find it in Jock Landale. Clearly, that did not work out. They have found it in Steven Adams with one asterisk. He will not be ready to play until next season. Memphis shut him down in the preseason once he had knee surgery, and so he's taking this season off. But he's expected to be fully healthy by next year, and after talking to some people with the Rockets, I can comfortably say that they are planning on him playing a real role with the team next season. This is not for the expiring contract, which he will be at $12.6 million annually through next season. This is not about that, although it will give them some optionality in terms of the trade slot. This was initially Kevin Porter Jr.'s salary. They flipped it and turned it into Victor Oladipo rather than losing KPJ's deal altogether. Now Victor Oladipo becomes Steven Adams at the cost of 3 second-round picks. And while you certainly can't rule out trades down the line, the bottom line is the Rockets made this deal because they really like the fit of Steven Adams with Alperen Sengun. They like the pairing. They like the different styles. It's simply unfortunate that he's not available this season. But as we've said plenty of times, the Rockets are not just about this year. It's about building now and in the future. And if the ideal fit available at the ideal cost, and he probably would have been more expensive if he was available for this year and thus available to whoever Memphis is selling for 2 years rather than one, then perhaps it would not have been doable for 3 second-round picks and the expiring contract of Victor Oladipo. So a lot of layers to it, but the bottom line is the Rockets have their backup center and the ideal fit in their eyes with Alperen Şengün, the kind of defensive big man that can cover someone like Jonas Valanciunas of the Pelicans, who the Rockets really struggled with on Wednesday night. He's just not going to be available until next season. But in my opinion, for a Rockets team that's not about winning now, they want to compete now, but they're certainly not in contention mode. I'm okay with that. And then as far as what happens with Steven Adams, the expiring contract, they would have his bird rights after next season. That will be a story for another day. We've got weeks and months leading up to when Steven Adams finally starts playing for the Rockets in October, and then we'll see what happens from that point forward in terms of, is he the right fit? Do you want to give him a new deal? Do you look at using his salary, expiring that is, as a vehicle to make a bigger trade work down the line in terms of matching? There's a lot of options, but the bottom line is the Rockets filled a need. It just may not be, well, it won't be filled until next season. And they also did what I said a few weeks ago was the bare minimum for this year's trade deadline. You could not let the Victor Oladipo salary simply roll off the books. There's a reason why you gave the Thunder a couple of second-round draft picks to get Oladipo. It's because rather than waive KPJ yourself, you wanted the optionality to keep that mid-sized salary, that contract slot on the books. And now not only have they filled that, but they've also filled, as of next season, the backup center need behind Alperen Şengün. So I like the deal in an abstract sense. Obviously, we're still waiting for clarity to see exactly what the second-round picks are and where they will be from. But we've talked about that before, Paolo, in that the Rockets had so many picks. They were slated to have 3 in 2024. This involves 2 of them. There's no way they could roster all of those guys anyway. So there was inevitably going to be a deal where the Rockets put together 2 or 3 second rounders for the next couple of years and consolidated that to fill some need on the roster or punted those picks back. Well, this is that consolidation move, and we'll see what happens with Steven Adams coming off a knee surgery, but he's going to have basically a full year off, and he's just 30 years old. As long as the Rockets medical staff did their due diligence, I don't see any reason why, especially for a guy who's a big man. It's not like he's particularly explosive to begin with. That's not his game. I don't see why after a full 12 months off, he can't get back to the guy he was, honestly, a year ago when he was a starter for a good Memphis team, finished second in the West, and he was basically averaging a double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds, or I believe 9 points, 11 rebounds, but same difference per night, and a very productive player. And as I said leading off, I've talked to people within the Rockets just in the last few minutes. They're optimistic about it. They like Steven Adams, the player. I don't think the cost is extravagant. So I don't know if it's a home run deal. It's not sexy. It does fill a need. The only negative is that he's not going to be available until next season. But in a year in which it's not like the Rockets are trying to contend anyway, I'm okay with that trade-off if it's a player you like under good terms, which I think Steven Adams is, both in terms of the asset cost of the trade as well as his salary moving forward. Paolo, what are your initial thoughts on the deal?
Personally, I like it from multiple angles. Obviously, we don't know yet what exactly the price was. There's still some variation as to whether the 2025 pick is ours or the Thunder's, which might be a big difference next year. Well, it is a big difference this year, might be next year. We have 38, 40 currently projected and 58 this year. So if 58 is one of them, that pick's basically worthless. Like pick 58 in the draft. Unless you're going to draft Brock Purdy, it doesn't matter, right? It's basically the last pick in the draft. So we'll see when it comes to that. But at the end of the day, it's just second round picks, and it fits what I had been saying on the pod for a while, which is I'm fine with any move, or basically any move that they want to make, as long as as they are not spending a first round pick. And with the article by Kelly Iko and Shams that came out this week, a lot of people were kind of panicking or expecting the Rockets to be hunting for a big move like right away, and at first I was kind of scared that they may do it just this deadline already, and I think this is a move that does both, right? It both signals that they likely won't be making that trade this deadline, otherwise they would have just kept Oladipo, and So it means that they'll give this team at least this year before, unless something crazy happens, at least this year to see what they are at. And for next year, it could be both. It could be the salary for a start trade, or it could be trading already for the what will be the backup center at that point. Another angle that I like is I just like Steven Adams, the person, right? I think he's an awesome player. I think he's really sportsmanlike. It doesn't really mean much for a lot of people, but he's been someone who I've really liked throughout the last few years. Basically his entire career, he's always been an awesome guy, and it's gonna be cool to see him in Rockets red and Rockets jersey. When it comes to playing, I'm not sure if he'll be able to play with Sengun, although if you're going, although he doesn't space the floor, right? But neither does Jay Shante. Then at least he has like what 6 inches on him, 7 inches on him, probably more, and he's a really good rebounder. And he brings some of the stuff that Sengun can do in the dribble handoff game. He was used to playing with Ja Morant. He's one of the best screen setters in the league, so he can run a lot of some of the small actions that Sengun runs around the 3-point line. So Amen Thompson and Jalen Green will be great fits with them, downhill guards, just like he played with Ja Morant in Memphis. And then besides that, first of all, I think not this year, but next year he'll probably be a great body in practice for Alperen Sengun. And we know how Alperen Sengun struggles to score on guards that he can't, on centers that he can't really move. So it'll be good for practice. And the last thing that I would bring up, which is actually kind of a funny twist, right, is I cannot stop to find, I cannot help but find it entertaining that we just got absolutely bullied by Jonas Valanciunas from the Pelicans. We had no answer for him. Doubles didn't work, Sengun didn't work, Jeff Green didn't work. He didn't even dare put Jock Landale out there. And so we went and we traded for the one guy in the entire NBA, and the NBA is full of athletes, but in the entire NBA that's actually stronger than Jonas Valanciunas. So I just can't help but think, like, it's obviously not tied together at all, but it doesn't. It's still a funny coincidence. And the last kind of funny point that I'll make is, I guess if we need someone to break up a fight, we know that now we have the guy. Obviously referencing the clip where Jazz getting in a fight with I don't even remember who, and he just lifts him up and lifts the other guy up and just carries him away in the most peaceful way possible. Because it's like, this is Steven Adams. You do not mess with Steven Adams. You'll just get knocked out just if he breathes on you. So obviously it depends on the picks, right? But if one of the picks is pick 58 via the Thunder, then this is basically giving up two second round picks for Steven Adams. And I'd make the argument that if Steven Adams were playing, you'd probably have to give up a late first for him. And this way you don't. Yeah. And you're still, as long as he's okay coming off the bench, he's still capable of starter production. So I wonder if they'll try to play him and Sengun together for, I don't know, 5-6 minutes a game, just to see how it would work. Just obviously Ime Udoka was known for playing Al Horford and Robert Williams, in Boston. Although Horford is a better shooter, but he's not really that great. He'll take like 2 or 3 threes a game. But overall, I'm, the fan side of me, obviously from a cap perspective, it makes sense. On the floor perspective, it makes sense. From a timeline perspective, it doesn't really make that much sense because we need this backup big right now. I wonder if they'll do something about it. But you're basically, since we are in a rebuild and we aren't in a rush, which was the narrative that I was combating against earlier, you are able to buy low because he's not going to be available for the next 3 months until the end of the season, but get rewarded for it later on. And I swear it's the last point I'll make on this. We know Bismack Biyombo is a free agent. I wonder if, and we now have Landale, Adams, Sengun, Jeff Green, and Boban. I wonder if this makes the Boban roster spot expendable, because at the very least, while I assume he's going to rehab with the team, or at least look into moving to Houston, Steven Adams is a great vibes guy. So
good point.
We may free up the Boban roster spot, and you can bring in Biombo to play this year, and you save, I don't know, just I guess what would be a couple of extra second round picks if you still want to go ahead and rent the guy just for this season.
Yeah. So let me jump in because I have gotten some clarity, and I'm guessing this will come out before our pod is edited and uploaded. But I sent some text out just prior to starting our recording, and as far as the picks, it's the best and worst of Houston's second rounders in 2024 and the best in 2025. So it's really like 2 second round picks because the worst is going to be that one at the very end, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the worst one, like literally, we've seen these picks get traded for cash considerations. Like
Right.
the 58th pick in the draft is take your pick of the litter of what is it going to eventually be the undrafted free agents. So that's
Yeah.
no value at all.
Okay, so that's the terms, and so it's going to be conditional when you look at the future second round pick list. And then as far as motivations for the Rockets, their models love Steven Adams. This is, from Memphis's perspective, a deal that's about saving money, and typically you can do these offloading deals on a friendlier terms at the deadline than you can in the offseason, because in the offseason, everyone knows that for various reasons, be it cap space or just setting up your tax bill, it tends to cost a little bit more of a premium. I think everyone remembers a few years ago when Golden State paid the premium to offload Andre Iguodala, and who was it? I think it was Memphis, right? That ended up getting a premium on both ends. You remember what I'm talking about?
I remember the Iguodala drama when he didn't want to play in Memphis. Is
Yeah,
this the situation?
yes, exactly. Because what ended up happening was that the Warriors traded him for salary payroll reasons in either late June or early July, and they had to trade a future first round pick to Memphis to make that happen because Memphis had all the leverage. And then I think Memphis actually ended up getting something for Iguodala, basically making him a positive asset when they traded him later on. I'm confirming that right now. But basically, just the timing of it made Iguodala a negative asset, or at least from a bargaining perspective, when Golden State traded him. And then when Memphis subsequently traded him to the Miami Heat midway through the next season, I think they ended up getting some sort of positive asset. Definitely didn't have to pay the asset the way that the Warriors did because of the timing. So it's a little bit of that. The Grizzlies thinking they can get a little bit better value now than if they wait until the off season. But from a Houston perspective, the deal came together quickly. As some of the advanced analytics models, Darko had him as the 37th overall player in the NBA last season. LeBron had him as the 32nd ranked. EPM had him the 33rd. Now, are those possibly a little inflated? Sure. And he is going to be 31 years old and coming off a knee injury. So, no, I'm not saying that he's going to be at that level next season, and he is going to be a backup. But the point is, he's graded really, really well by some of the advanced models, which I know the Rockets rely on heavily. So for them, it's strictly a value deal. When they got word that Memphis was open to this type of arrangement, they jumped on it simply because from a value perspective, they think what they are getting in Steven Adams is worth more than what they are giving up in those picks. And in terms of his future role on the team or his salary, his filler down the road, they'll worry about that at a later date. For now, it's just they see more value on this side of the equation, and that's why they did the deal, especially when, again, they weren't going to have room to roster all of those second round picks anyway. Now, the other thing I've learned is that this does not preclude them from going after a center that could help this year's team. It's not so much that they were saying, well, this year doesn't matter. Now, that's a small part of it because they are using some resources in the deal, but they are open to improving this year. It's more the motivation was this is a good opportunity. We think this is good value for what we're giving up, i.e. those second round picks and the expiring salary of Oladipo. Let's do it. With that said, if they can get a center probably on an expiring contract, although I guess maybe they would still consider if it was clear the guy would have positive trade value, someone that had multiple years left. But if that's the case, I don't know if they have the assets to get a deal done. More reasonably, it's probably a center on an expiring contract, but they are still open to filling that hole on this season's team. So it's not so much that they're saying, okay, we're out of the center market this year. From my understanding, that is not the case. It's more this makes sense from a value perspective, and it's definitely going to help us in terms of projecting next year. For this year, I guess it hurts you a little bit that you lose some of the second round picks as trade bait, and now you don't have Oladipo's filler contract. But if there's an expiring that they can get for Jock Landale or Jeff Green, I don't know why they wouldn't still consider it. That's the vibe that I get. So I guess that's interesting to me, is that it's not just about strictly the backup center role and Steven Adams being the ideal fit. It's more just Steven Adams as a player. They just think it's really good value for 3 second round picks, one of them being a really bad one. So almost 2 second round picks, as you were saying. And as far as the backup center for this year's team, we're still sort of in the same place. They're still looking to fill that. It's just now they have less assets to do it. So time will tell over the next week if they're able to do so. Does that all make sense to you as far as the thinking from their end?
Yeah, if I think from a straight up value, now that we know that Big 58 is one of them, I do think it's a deal that if you see it across your table, you just take instantly. So from that perspective, it's a fine deal. And the intangibles work, on the court works, and even though you're just telling me now that there's still a possibility that they go after another backup 5 just for this year, it takes away the fear that they'll spend the first round pick on it, because they surely wouldn't spend a first round pick if they wouldn't do this trade if they were to spend a first round pick on another backup center, which was a fear of mine. And so I guess that boils it down to probably Olynyk, maybe Andre Drummond, depending on what the Bulls are trying to do, as guys that they could bring in to play that role just for this season that you don't really expect to bring back the year after, next year. But yeah, overall, I think it's a good deal, and I think it's another one of those deals where the Rockets let the story be told by the other side of the negotiations table, right? Because you hear 3 second round picks and they're like, that's quite a bit for a guy that's not going to play this year, and then you hear what the second round picks are, and it's actually basically 2 second round picks, and that's a third of the cost. So yeah, definitely makes me feel better.
All right, so let's pivot to other things on the Rockets' agenda this week. Well, I don't want to say that Jalen Green is on the agenda, because I'm not ever convinced they were looking to trade him. But conceivably, if you buy into some of the chatter, I would think that the last 5 games have made it less likely, because I don't know how anyone watching these games could not be enthused by what they're watching. Over the last 5, he's averaging it right at 30 points per game, 29.8, true shooting percentage nearly 65, overall field goal percentage a little over 51, 3-point percentage a little below 36, just phenomenal. And actually the 3-point percentage being fairly pedestrian, not bad, but certainly not great, encourages me, because it's not like he just randomly got hot. No, he's made some material changes to his game. The free throw rate, he's actually above what he was at a year ago, and well above what he was at over the first 40 games of this season, well above 6 per game over these 5. He's getting not just to the line, but he's finishing inside more. He's attacking. He's aggressive. He's decisive. He's making better reads. He just looks like a different player. He's also defending and rebounding better. And some of this, we hear this all the time, and it's true. Players tend to compete harder defensively when they see the ball go through the bucket, because they're excited. They're playing with a purpose again. It's not like they have their head down and they're feeling bad about things. And we heard Ime Udoka mention in one of the post games that the Rockets had put together a montage of some of the lowlights for Jalen as a rebounder, just standing and watching. And since then, he's averaging more than 7 boards a game in this stretch. And so it shows you that he has a certain degree of humility, that he's coachable. All these things are really promising signs, and I do believe that some of it could be sustainable. Not will be, but could be, because it's not like he just randomly got hot. No, there's actually a change to his shot profile, to his approach. There are fundamentally some things he's doing differently that appear to be paying off. Now, is that going to hold? Of course, time will tell. He's now in year 3, and so it is a little bit later than when you typically see a change this drastic pay dividends, but it's not unprecedented. And we should also note that the NBA is a game of adjustments. Just as this seems to be his adjustment, there's also going to be opposing coaches that change up their tactical strategy and how they use their guys to defend him, both individually and in a team construct. So this is sort of the counter from Jalen and the Rockets to the coverages he's gotten for a lot of this season and perhaps his first couple of years as well. Well, now the league, especially as he continues to stack good games, is going to change how they defend him. So it's always adjusting to the adjustments, if you will. So beyond it just being a small sample, even though we think that it's not just randomly getting hot, that he's made some material changes to his game, we also have to see what happens when or if teams perhaps start to defend him a little bit differently. So, no, I'm not taking these 5 games to the bank by any means. But a couple of things. First, I'm just so happy for Jalen on a personal level. It's pretty clear that this has been weighing on him, the struggles this season. So, for a guy who works hard, has a good attitude, I'm thrilled to see him have some success. But in terms of the trade deadline and what the Rockets may or may not do, I don't know how this wouldn't make you a bit more reluctant to pull the trigger if they were ever open to this in the first place to something involving Jalen Green. Because in terms of the calculus for a team trading for Jalen, look, we can make the case for why the window appears a bit more open for Jalen salvaging things based on the past 10 days or so. But I don't think another team trading for Jalen is going to buy into, oh, he's just magically figured it out. I don't think that's how it's going to work over a sample as small as a couple of weeks. I think if a team trades for Jalen, it's largely going to be on the back of his talent, which goes all the way back to the 2021 draft, and saying, look, we know he's been on the whole a bit underwhelming in Houston, but we think he'll figure it out. And if we put him into our system with our coaches and use him a little bit differently, then we might get better results. If a team is trading for Jalen, that's going to be their thought process. And you know what? No matter what happens the rest of the year, even if Jalen does regress a little bit, gets back to being maddeningly inconsistent, you can still make a trade this summer involving Jalen using that same logic. And I don't think that the value he would get on the open market would be all that different. Conversely, if this is sustainable and Jalen plays at probably not 30 points per game, that's getting a little carried away, but even if it's just low to mid 20s and say a true shooting percentage in the upper 50s and I guess 5 rebounds per game. Even if he just does that for the last 40, that absolutely transforms his future outlook here in Houston. I don't know if it's enough for you to give him a contract extension this offseason, although I think they'd certainly be open to it in that scenario. By the way, the contract talks, I don't think that's something that should move you as far as a potential deal because he would be restricted. It's not just from the perspective of the Rockets, also the team trading for Jalen. If he pans out, because he would be a restricted free agent and because they would have bird rights, they would have no trouble retaining Jalen if things go according to plan. The question is, will they go according to plan? So in terms of what would a team conceivably trade for Jalen or value him at in a deal, if you were conceivably looking, we heard the rumors about maybe Jalen Green and some combination of Brooklyn picks for Mikal Bridges. The point is, however another team might value Jalen, I don't think it's going to change all that much based on, oh, he's in the last year of his contract as opposed to right now he's in the second to last. No, because a young player, a recent first-round pick, again, they're going to be restricted free agents, and if you want to keep them, you can keep them. No, it's going to come down to what that team values him as basketball-wise and what they think the likely outcome is in terms of him reaching some or all of his ceiling. And so from that perspective, I don't think the last 2 weeks is going to materially change the value simply because it's too small of a sample. And even if he goes back to being inconsistent the rest of the year, by the way, we should point out that as bad as December was, if you go month by month since January just concluded, he's actually been pretty good in both November and January. It's just the season as a whole is dragged down by what was an awful December. Of course, that gets back to the inconsistency. But as far as the trade calculus here, I just don't see a lot of downside to waiting from a Rockets perspective. And with the Brooklyn deal in particular, you could always revisit the Mikal Bridges scenario over the summer. It would still be there. And the calculus for the Nets in terms of the picks mattering to them more because they are their own, that would still be applicable then. So for me, seeing this from Jalen, I just see a lot more upside to standing pat, not just in terms of Jalen, the basketball player, who clearly has elite upside. There's a reason why he was drafted number 2 overall, and that's why I've always been inclined to keep him at least through year 3 and maybe year 4 as well. But just from a trade value perspective, if you keep him, it's absolutely possible that his value could increase significantly if this continues over the final 40 games of this year, as opposed to if it regresses. I honestly don't think his value would be all that different on the market than it is right now, simply because his value in the market right now is, that's baked in the inconsistency. And I don't think, after year 3, he's going to be just 22 years old. I don't think anyone's going to be saying, oh, he's over the hill, he's a bust now. No, I don't think it's going to change that dramatically. So I guess my perspective on Jalen and the deadline, unless something phenomenal comes available in terms of a legit all-star level talent like that Shams piece alluded to, and I have no idea who that would be. I've not heard any specific names. Unless it's something transformative, and for me, I don't even think Mikal Bridges qualifies. To me, there's just far more upside by staying the course with Jalen, seeing if this is sustainable, and if he regresses, if it doesn't work out, then you can trade him this summer or at the deadline. I know no one wants to see him walk for no compensation, but to me, you could revisit trades this summer or during next season, perhaps even with his, rights as a restricted free agent next summer, and still get fairly comparable value to what I think he's valued at today. So for me, for all of those reasons, I was never on the side of exploring Jalen trades. I just never thought it lined up. But now seeing this uptick over the past week, I'm even more convinced this is not the time. Paolo, where do you weigh in on everything you've seen in the past week from Jalen and how that might affect how he's viewed by the Rockets and the NBA leading up to this trade deadline?
Yeah, I have no idea what happened. Like, I have no idea what clicked, because he looks like a completely different player, right? And the biggest thing is how he's finishing at the rim, right? But it's like he's taking a completely different approach to it. He used to take awful angles. He always left, like, it felt like he was the easiest player to block at the rim in the league, because it was either a straight up, he's going to try to dunk on you, or the layups would be the most simple thing, and he wouldn't even shield his own layups with his body, or he wouldn't, bump guys off of their spots when going for the layup. There was this one play that to me was just completely different, and it's a very simple play. John gets a kick out in the corner. He blows by his man, and there's help at the rim. And he drives, and he gets basically directly below the basket, like while sprinting, and he just goes up before the basket, lays it up, using obviously his body. He's facing the basket. His back's obviously between the shot blocker and the rim, and he just gets the layup to go, and there's no way that the shot blocker can ever contest that. And it just felt completely different. He was using his athleticism to power through a defender, right, to make the angle tougher on them to try to block the shot. And then he made the layup. It's not like he's making some crazy like circus layups. It's not like the layup package has really changed. It's just the context in which he's taking the layups. It's just how decisive he is going to the basket, and the angles he's taking when he eventually gets there. And so all of this to say that and then I think the rest of his game is just coming from that. You can add, obviously, some of the points are coming from the fact that he's grabbing rebound and pushing the ball in transition. Obviously, you can also point out to the fact that he looks better on the defensive end. And the shooting hasn't even been that impressive. I think he over the stretch is like 36%. It's not like
right. Exactly. That's why I think it's more sustainable.
Yeah, and although I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's from the eye test. I guess he's hot shooting from the mid range. I mean, I don't know. He's also taking better shots from the mid range. He still takes some contested ones that he's usually missing, but he seems more decisive in even the mid range shots that he takes. So how this impacts the team strategy going forward is, listen, the only thing worse than having to give up on a guy you drafted second overall that you've been modeling your rebuild around, at the very least from a public perception standpoint, because he has been marketed as the guy for the entire time. The only thing worse than giving up than that guy busting and you giving up on him is giving up on him too soon. Because if you trade him, he goes to another team and he's balling out and he makes an all-star game. Now how do you look? You traded that guy away. You gave up on that guy a year or two too early, and you missed out. That's the only thing worse than drafting a busted number 2 is that. And so if he's giving you some revived hope that he might still be something great, you just have to hold on to it, because it's not like you're going to get a great return for him anyways.
Right, exactly.
And you are going to have more information on him than what any other team has, and so intrinsically you're going to value him above what other teams are going to value him at. So it just doesn't really make much sense to buy it. It's not like you would be selling high; you'd be selling low, obviously. So, and the other thing is, he's also like, it's not like you could use help at a different position. You have a guy trying to break through at Jalen's position. Cam Whitmore's been great. I'm not sure if the team would be ready to just start him at this point, like right away. But you'd ideally be trading Jalen for someone else to play the same position. So if Jalen's playing well, then the problem's already fixed. You don't have to package extra assets with him to go and get another guy to play the shooting guard position, unless a crazy opportunity came around, like a Desmond Bain or something like that. So I mean, I'm just incredibly happy that he's doing well and that he's been doing well consistently for 5 games now. Because I mean, I may have sold my stock to some extent a bit early, in the sense that, like a month ago, I was just tired of watching him struggle. But he's a great guy. And he's been someone that I've been invested in since the beginning of this rebuild. He was the first guy we had that we were like, oh my God, this guy's the future. And so nothing will make me happier than to see him pan out. So it's just great to see. And hopefully, because we made a segment on him and because people are talking about him doing great, it doesn't make him go back to what he was before. And it makes me wonder if there's anything to the narrative that he's better in the second half of the season, because it was basically like this in January when he got hurt in his rookie season. He got hurt in December. He came back in January and he was just a completely different player. So hopefully, I mean, not hopefully that's it, because I'd rather him be a good player the entire season. But hopefully he can at least keep this up.
And one thing I will say, as far as the trade possibilities, I want to clarify. I've done some digging on that front as well. And that Athletic story came out the day of the Pelicans game when I was at Toyota Center. So I had some conversations. And my understanding is that Jalen's name was never brought up. In fact, no one's name was actually brought up. It was very exploratory because, for reasons we've discussed in the past, those draft picks that Houston owns from Brooklyn are disproportionately valuable to the Nets because they impede their ability to bottom out and acquire elite talent through the draft, potentially starting this year. They're 19 and 28 as we're recording this pod. So with that in mind, the Rockets reached out just simply saying, look, is there a conversation you want to have as far as the picks? And it just makes sense for Mikal Bridges. I do think the Rockets like Bridges as a player. He also happens to be the best player on the Nets, and he's only 27 years old. So it was more, do you want to potentially look at what a deal like this would look like? And the Nets, at least at this point, are still saying no. And whether that's a firm no remains to be seen. I know to this point the Nets have been unwilling to bottom out and tank, which is what reacquiring some or all of their picks would do. Although we should note the last 2 trade deadlines, they said in 2022 they weren't going to move James Harden. They did on deadline day. In 2023, they said they weren't going to move Kevin Durant, and then they did at the start of deadline week. So until you get to the final hours, you never know with Brooklyn. They've caved the last 2 years. I'll throw in that. But if they're legitimate, and to this point, my understanding is that they've said they're not interested in talking. And even if we think that's silly, that's certainly their prerogative. They can run as their front office and ownership sees fit. From the Rockets, it was never, people have asked, was Jalen in the deal? Was it some or all of the picks? My understanding, it never got to that level of depth. It was more just exploratory. Do you want to have a conversation? Because the Rockets know they have a market advantage with owning those picks and a team that in Brooklyn, at least in terms of the logic of it, now they may not act logically, but I think we both agree that logically Brooklyn should want those assets back. It gives them substantially more control of their future. The Rockets simply made overtures saying, is this something you want to talk about? And the Nets to this point have said no. And so in terms of whether it be some of the picks, all the picks, is Jalen involved? Is he not involved? I don't know. And we may never have to find out because it sounds like Brooklyn doesn't want to go down that path anyway for whatever reason, unless they cave on deadline week. So for me, that aspect is noteworthy. And also, my understanding is that while there is a kernel of truth to the Athletic story in that the Rockets did inquire about Mikal Bridges, I don't think the broader narrative that the Rockets are looking to expedite the timetable or have a sense of urgency to do a deal now, even if it costs one of the core 6 prospects, I think that was overdone. I think some of that was supposition of, well, the Rockets are interested in Bridges, who isn't available. Maybe they'd be willing to offer a similar deal for someone else. And if you read the fine print of the Athletic story, you'll see that a lot of the sourcing is from rival executives. That's not from the Rockets. That's from other people guessing what the Rockets might be thinking. In this case, there's some nuance being lost. And I'm not even sure they would do a deal for Bridges. They may only be willing to do it if it's under certain terms. So it's not even like they're necessarily going all out for Bridges. It's just saying because there's a market inefficiency there from the Nets perspective, we should, as the team on the other side of it, be at least open to dialogue should they want those picks, their own that is, back. As far as deals around the league, it's not even so much that it's not true. Of course, the Rockets would always be willing to listen for an all-star caliber player. Any team would be. But first off, I don't see a player like that on the market this deadline. The closest thing to it would have been Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland, but he's clearly off the market until at least this offseason. That perhaps could be another factor in the Nets sort of stalling things out. There's connections between Mitchell and New York, and if things don't go well for Cleveland in the playoffs with 1 year left on his contract, maybe he tries to leverage a deal to the Knicks or Nets this summer. And the Nets do have, while not their own picks, they've got future draft capital from Phoenix from the Durant trade that they could use as bait. I don't know, maybe that's a possibility, along with their stockpile of role players throughout the roster on pretty decent contracts. Maybe that's a factor in them wanting to stall and not completely go the bottom out route. But I just think there's a lot of supposition in the story from the rival executives. I think, again, there's some truth in that the Rockets at least wanted to explore what a Mikal Bridges trade construction might look like. But in terms of the assumptions that are being made off that, not just Jalen Green's availability, but also, what the Rockets would conceivably do with the same picks and the same types of assets in terms of making deals elsewhere around the league. Again, people are putting the cart way in front of the horse, from my understanding. And I think the Steven Adams deal today reflects the fact that the Rockets aren't operating with a super sense of urgency about this season. If the value deal is about waiting until next year, then they'll wait until next year. And I think, again, the Adams deal sort of proves that. So I just think that in terms of, linking our Jalen discussion to this Bridges rumor and this broader Athletic story, I just think that, like a lot of stories, there is some truth in it. But there's also a broader narrative that's a little bit exaggerated or misleading. I'm not even necessarily saying that the Athletic did a lot of things wrong in the reporting. No, some of it's just sourcing rival executives who I don't think are fully apprised in what Houston's plan is or aware of the nuance. Does that background make you feel a little bit better about, I guess, the context of that story? Because when I had these conversations, I'm not going to lie, when I first saw the sense of urgency, it did make me sort of raise my eyebrow, because the Rockets aren't at a point now where they should pay a premium, in my opinion, just to make the play-in or the playoffs this season, a year they're not going to contend anyway. They're set up well for the future. All of these young guys are showing flashes. Why, pay a premium to do something now when the window isn't quite open anyway, just to, say you made the play-in tournament or the playoffs or what have you. But I think when you understand the context and you step back and think that, hey, even if Mikal Bridges isn't in, perfect age alignment with this core, there might be an opportunity to get him, or theoretically could be, on the cheap because of that whole draft pick value equation, then it makes sense to at least have a conversation there. And that logic does not necessarily apply to other big names potentially on the market this deadline. It was interesting, by the way, in the same story that, they pointed out that Murray with the Hawks and Levine with the Bulls would not be targets. Well, yeah, that's why. It needs to really move the needle if it's going to be, not at a bargain rate. And my guess is that ultimately nothing happens. Does that context, make you feel any better about the stuff you read yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's always kind of scary, right? Because, I mean, we've been talking about it all season. It's just because we are better than we expected to be, we can't lose sight of the fact that I do think we're still better than what, at least Vegas expected us to be. We can't lose sight of the fact that this is the process, right? And we can't get too ahead of ourselves. The one thing, and it got me worried. Two things got me worried. First of all, it got me worried that they were mentioning rushing it And it got me worried that the reason that they cited for it was the fact that Ime Udoka had been a winning coach, for his one season with the Celtics, and he wanted to get back to winning as quickly as possible. Like, I love Ime. I think he's doing a great job. I start to worry if we get to a point where he's pushing for trades that the front office doesn't really believe in from a timeline perspective, right? I'm all for him giving his his insight and his input into the guys we should go after. But the class of guys that we're going after should probably be still the front office's call, because they have a better understanding of what the timeline looks like, even though Ime has a better understanding of what fits well on the floor. So we're looking for a guy that's between 24 and 27 that plays a certain position. And then Ime goes ahead and says, oh, I like this guy more than I like this guy. This guy makes sense. This guy fits what we're trying to do. This guy doesn't. That makes sense for me. If Ime is the one saying, oh, we should be going after the guy of a certain age, of a certain, profile from a timeline perspective, and then Rafael Stone's the one picking, who the actual guy is, then it seems to me that the roles would be reversed. I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but I'm saying that's what was going through my mind when I read, oh, Ime Udoka, is pushing for the rush for, the Rockets to be better as soon as possible. I mean, of course they are. It's just how much are you willing to invest to get that done? And this trade kind of calms my nerves a little bit when it comes to, that side of it. And I think, I mean, they couldn't have made their intentions any clearer when they had. I mean, it's not like this is the one center that's available on the market. No, there's Gafford, there's Olynyk, there's Drummond, there's Robert Williams, I'm sure there's other guys that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, that that would make sense, but they went for this guy that can't play this year. And even the openness to go for a guy like that, and kind of punt the problem, to not next year but the year after, just makes me feel safer in that regard. And the last thing that I'll mention about the trade is, obviously I didn't talk to anyone, but I'm guessing that what happened was they had, a top end of what they had, a budget, I would guess, that like a fixed budget, in the sense that we're not willing to go as far as a first round pick unless it's a guy that we think we can build upon for the future. And Steven Adams' opportunity arises where they can get a starting level center that they can play as a backup. That extends the salary through next year. That doesn't cost a first round pick. And so that's a lot of checks that Steven Adams instantly clears. The one thing he doesn't clear is helping out for this season.
Yeah.
But I think it's way more important to not give up a first round pick. It's way more important to, have salary carry over into next year, because, for people that are not aware, they're not going to break the numbers down right now, but the Rockets could choose basically between having about 17 million in cap space or acting above the cap, so guaranteeing the contracts that they currently have for one more season, having them a straight fodder if they need it, and still have the biggest mid-level exception they can possibly have, which would be about 13 to 14 million. So the 3 added million that they would have to throw at a single guy or multiple guys is not worth, those 3 million are not worth the amount of salary that you'd have to shed that you then wouldn't have for trades. Because the thing is, Rockets have their talent very concentrated, right? They have a lot of, top end draft picks in the core 6, and then they have 40 million allocated to Fred VanVleet and 20 million allocated to Dylan Brooks, and none of these guys are moving. Or for a marginal upgrade, none of these guys are moving. They would be moved in a star trade. And so if you were looking to make a marginal upgrade around the edges, if this team feels like it's lacking a shooter off the bench, or this team feels like it's lacking a backup big, not at this point because we have Steven Adams, but what you'd want to move would be the Jeff Greens of the world, Jason Tates of the world, the Jock Landales of the world. And by acting above the cap and having the 13, 14 million of the exception instead of the 17 million of pure cap space, is you get the exception, and you also get that salary that you can use to go after those players in a trade that you likely wouldn't be giving up core assets for. So keeping that optionality is obviously key. Those are the two main reasons why the Steven Adams deal makes sense. And I think we are still at a point in the rebuild where it's it's more of a don't make a huge mistake by taking a huge swing, right? The risk of taking a huge swing and missing is way bigger than is way scarier than the upside of taking a huge swing and hitting. Because even if you go ahead and you go get the perfect player and you spend all of the picks doing so, it's not like you're instantly a contender, right? You want to be closer to contention before you make a move like that. So yeah, it's not a huge move, but I think it telegraphs what they're trying to do pretty well. It shows foresight, and hey, at the end of the day, as a pure fan, it's a player that I love, right? It's a great guy, and I'm going to love having him on the team going forward.
All right, last topic, and we'll make this quick. Alperen Şengün missing out on the All-Star team, at least for now. It's possible he could be an injury replacement at a later date. It seems every year there's always one or two of those, so stay tuned. But the bottom line, Nikola Jokic was the starting center, and then the two big men amongst the reserves. You rarely have more than that because it's just difficult to play all of those guys. Anthony Davis of the Lakers and Karl Anthony Towns of the Timberwolves. I'm fine with it. I wanted LP to get the honor, but let's just be honest. He's not quite at the Anthony Davis level just yet. That's fine. He's year 3. He's 21 years old, still plenty of time. Anthony Davis, a little bit better player. And who knows, maybe Davis ends up pulling out because he's been nicked up of late. He's actually missing tonight's game along with LeBron for the Lakers in Boston. But Anthony Davis, I think, is better than Şengün. And then the other big man, Karl Anthony Towns, the Timberwolves. Look, you can make an argument for Şengün, but the Timberwolves are the number 1 team in the Western Conference. That's going to give them any sort of tiebreaker. And in terms of the voting process, which for reserves is solely by coaches, I think the fact that Towns has been around for so long as opposed to Şengün in year 3, not saying you can't make an argument for Şengün, but between Towns being on the number 1 team in the West and having several more years of NBA experience, I can understand it. I think it's an honor just for Şengün to be in the conversation. It's just simply a loaded field to be in the top 12, really the top 3 amongst big men in the Western Conference. And again, not saying he can't get there because there probably will be an injury replacement, specifically with Anthony Davis. So I'm not giving up hope just yet. But as far as the 3 picked ahead of him, I don't see any shame in that. I would have loved to have seen LP get the honor, but again, he's just 21 years old. It's great for him to even be in the conversation, and I'm sure he'll actually get the honor in the future, right?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna, I was disappointed that he didn't make it. I think he had an argument over either one of Karl Anthony Towns, who is just better than, and possibly Anthony Edwards. But Anthony Edwards is,
that's
one of
position based.
Yeah, and one of the poster childs of the NBA. That one of the guys that they potentially could make the place of the league for the foreseeable future. So he was always going to make it. And then with Karl Anthony Towns, Şengün has just straight up better numbers, but the Timberwolves have such a good record that it's tough to not give them 2 All-Stars, right? And they realistically have someone who could be an All-Star, right? So they conceivably could have given it to him. There's also other guys that you could make the argument that didn't make it that could have taken that spot, like Sabonis, although I do think LP is a better player at this point. And so all of this to say that I understand why it didn't happen. It was always a little bit of a reach for it to happen. Hey, hopefully it fueled Şengün, because I don't know if he already knew as of last game, because he had a pretty poor performance. So hopefully he uses it as fuel and goes back to what he was doing before Jalen started going off. Although he didn't play pretty well in LA, hopefully he goes back to being Alperen Şengün, because this team needs it. And every game that we lose while Jalen's playing like this is a waste, because when Jalen's dropping 30 compared to an inefficient 15 that he was doing earlier in the season, we should be taking advantage of those games and winning them.
By the way, Şengün listed as questionable for Friday with an illness, which actually makes me feel a little bit better, because if he was sick, that could actually explain why he had one of his worst games of the year, both in terms of the overall energy. He wasn't nearly as active as he typically is on the glass, and missing some bunnies right at the rim. But look, my view of that game, it sucks to lose because of the play-in push. And this will sort of be my closing thoughts on this episode, which is much more macro than micro. Obviously, with the trade deadline a week away and the Rockets actually making a trade, that's the reason we're talking more big picture today. But I can't even get that upset about the micro, even if a game like yesterday cost them the play-in tournament. Look, if Jalen Green is legitimately figuring it out, that's way more important because of the long-term implications. A frustrating loss, especially because the loss to the Pelicans, let's be honest, it was pretty fluky. It was one of Şengün's worst games of the season, as you were referring to. Valanciunas is a fairly atypical type of big man. There's not that many of them, as we were talking about earlier in the NBA, so it was a difficult matchup. He went for 25 and 14. And then the three-point shooting being terrible outside of Jalen Green and Cam Whitmore. Look, if Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks have forgotten how to shoot, the Rockets are going to be in trouble. That's just the reality. Fortunately, I don't think that's the case. Now, I guess you can worry about Fred VanVleet's back. As we talked about last episode, he's shooting like below 30% over his last 11 games from three. But at this point, I think you got to trust the Rockets. He hasn't been on the injury report since. So I think it's just a slump. Hopefully he'll play better. It's not as if I've noticed anything off. And quite frankly, even if the worst case does happen, as you made the point last episode, and we were distinguishing between the Tari Eason injuries. By the way, it sounds like they're hoping Tari Eason could play next week. That would be very welcome news at this point. Even if something were to happen to Fred, while it would suck for this year, it's not as if he's as long-term a piece as someone like Tari or in this week's pod, Jalen Green. So the implications of someone like that are a bit more important. So I think first off, like I said, the way they lost against the Pelicans was pretty fluky. I mean, yeah, you need to win a game when Jalen plays like that. But honestly, we've had 40 games of Şengün playing at an all-star level. He's going to be fine. He did not lose it. And then missing the open three-pointers. Guys like Fred and Dillon, I think they're going to come around, even though they have not shot well the last couple of weeks. The only guy I'm worried about in terms of shooting is Jeff Green. He's 20% over his last 12 games. And my suspicion is that, as you talked about early in the year, that sort of there's a physical toll that comes with expecting an undersized guy to be your day in, day out backup center, especially when he's 37 years old. And so my guess is that asking him to bang against some of those bigger bodies, taking a little bit of a toll on his juice in terms of his jump shot, in terms of his mobility defensively. I just don't think Jeff has been anywhere near as impactful as he was earlier this season. And that could also play into why, as I said earlier, my understanding from the Rockets is that while they're pleased with Steven Adams and love his fit next year, it's not as if they're ruling out pursuing a backup center this year. That's still possible. They might err on the side of a backup with an expiring contract now, simply because you already have Adams signed for that role next year. But it is still a role that could help this year's team. And this year's team, even with some of the maddening inconsistencies and the struggles, 22 and 25, you're still right there as we're recording within a game of the Western Conference play-in field. So a lot to play for. And the Toronto game on Friday night is one you probably need to win, especially since you let that one against Portland slip away last week. Paolo, anything else that you wanted to add before we close up shop?
I'll just add two quick things. I think it's kind of triggering that when Kevin's doing well, everybody else has to struggle for some reason. It's like there's a zero-sum game of talent within the team, and when a guy does well, Jabari had one of his worst games of the season on both ends of the floor. He couldn't buy a bucket and he couldn't defend for anything, and against the Pelicans, obviously. And then the other thing, it's just I hope that they're being extremely careful with Tari Eason and his comeback. As I said before, this season or making the play in this season is not worth a long-term injury for Tari, especially that could threaten the length of his career or whatever it is. Leg issues are always tough. So hopefully if he does come back, I'll be super happy because I love him. But hopefully if he does come back, it's because he's actually 100% and not playing through pain like he was earlier in the season.
We should point out that it's going to be more than a month. As we said last week, the writing was on the wall. He last played on January 1st, and next week is the week of the trade deadline, Thursday, February 8th. So he missed less than a month the first time. It's going to be more than a month this time. So hopefully that will do the trick, knock on wood. I also suspect that they will bring him along gradually, knowing that there's basically going to be just about a week until the trade deadline, I believe, or a week until the All-Star break, excuse me. I believe February 14th, Valentine's Day, is the last game of the first half of the season. So if he comes back towards the end of next week, you could probably get him in 3 or 4 games prior to the break at fairly low minutes, say 15, 18 a night, and then try and bring him back closer to full capacity after the All-Star break, when he'll have another week to rest. They can also monitor his leg and make sure that it's responding. That way, before you turn him loose into anything close to a normal rotation role, you can, see what happens when you sort of dip your toe in the water, so to speak, and see how that leg responds to the smaller usage. Because in an ideal world, I do think they would love to have him out of the All-Star break, because that's when this season could really be decided. You've got 6 games, against the Pelicans, Thunder twice, and Suns 3 times, and 4 of those 6 are on the road. So that's a pretty difficult stretch coming out of the All-Star break, and it's one in which you probably need Tari Eason at close to full capacity if you want to get at least a couple of those games. And, we talked about it on the recently completed road trip when they went 1-5. 1-5 is a lot different than 0-6, and 2-4 is a lot different than 1-5. Any game you can pick off in a difficult stretch like that does so much to mitigate the damage, because that gap between losing a certain amount of games relative to 500, that's going to make all the difference. And the Rockets 3 under now, they can't afford to throw away that much more in terms of the buffer to 500, because I don't know if it'll be the Lakers, the Warriors, the Jazz, whoever it is, but some of these teams are going to make a push. My guess is you've got to be in the range of 500 at the end of this season. So need to make hay against teams like the Raptors, who they play twice over the next week, once here and then in the Fred VanVleet return to Toronto homecoming. I believe that's next Friday, right after the trade deadline. And those are the types of games that you really need to pick off. And then in these difficult stretches, just try and steal a couple of games to limit the damage. And hopefully you can stay in the vicinity of 500. Some reinforcements at the trade deadline for this season would certainly help, but time will tell as to whether Rafael Stone and the Rockets are able to pull that off. All right, that's enough talk for one episode. We've been all over the place, but let's be honest, there's a lot to discuss. The Jalen Green breakout, the trade for Steven Adams, the news that Alperen Sengun is not an all-star. So apologies if we've been a bit disjointed, because, boy, there's a lot to get into on this show. Just glad we were able to do, hopefully, some satisfactory justice to those topics. All right, that'll do it for today. For Paolo Alves, I'm Ben Dubose. As always, we appreciate you so much for listening. You can follow Paolo on Twitter/X at Paolo Alves NBA, me at Ben Dubose. And then, as mentioned earlier, the Logger Line. If you go to the Twitter page, well, I know it's X, but it's still twitter.com/the Logger Line. That's the URL. If you hit up that link tree, that's where you can access all of our content, as far as me at Rockets Wire, Sports Talk 790, but also the sponsors of the program. Karbach Brewing, their beer, Clutch to the Lager, developed in collaboration with the Rockets. You can access their content and support us that way. And also, if you have not already subscribed to the show, left a positive review, please leave that 5-star at Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, and you should be able to find that direct link through, again, the Logger Line on Twitter, and hit up the link tree in the bio. All right, with the plugs complete, we'll wrap up. Again, for Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of the Logger Line.